I imagine walking up to a construction site you designed from the ground up, carrying blueprints you spent months perfecting, only to be stopped at the gate and told you don't belong there. Picture the moment when years of education, sleepless nights, and architectural brilliance are reduced to assumptions based on your appearance. On a crisp October morning in downtown Seattle, this exact scenario unfolds when Damon Mitchell, a 34-year-old lead architect, approaches the Skyline Commons construction site wearing work boots and a hard hat. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. What starts as a routine site inspection becomes a confrontation that exposes the deep-seated biases lurking within the construction industry. When security refuses to believe that the man in work clothes could possibly be the project's mastermind, tensions escalate rapidly. But what happens when the very person you're trying to exclude turns out to be the architect who designed every beam, every foundation, every detail of the $180 million project rising before your eyes? This is more than a story about mistaken identity. It's about the invisible barriers that persist in industries built on assumptions about who belongs in leadership roles. Set against the backdrop of Seattle's booming construction scene, this confrontation will challenge everyone involved to examine their own preconceptions about expertise, authority, and respect. The morning sun cast long shadows across the bustling construction site of Skyline Commons, Seattle's most ambitious mixed-use development project. The $180 million complex was set to transform an entire city block into a modern marvel of residential towers, retail spaces, and public areas. Steel beams reached toward the cloudy Pacific Northwest sky, while the constant hum of machinery created a symphony of progress and ambition. Damon Mitchell stepped out of his weathered pickup truck, adjusting the yellow hard hat that had become as familiar as his morning coffee. At 34, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who understood every inch of the project taking shape before him. His work boots crunched against the gravel as he approached the site's main entrance, a portfolio of updated blueprints tucked securely under his arm. The Seattle skyline stretched beyond the construction zone, a testament to the city's rapid growth and endless appetite for innovation. Damon had spent countless hours studying that skyline, understanding how Skyline Commons would fit into the urban fabric, how it would cast shadows and catch light, how pedestrians would flow through its ground-level spaces. Every detail had been meticulously planned, every angle calculated for maximum impact and functionality. As the lead architect for Hartwell & Associates, one of the most prestigious architectural firms in the Pacific Northwest, Damon had poured 2 years of his life into this project. The initial concept had been his brainchild, born of late-night sketches and early morning inspiration sessions. He'd presented the vision to city planners, navigated zoning challenges, and refined the design through dozens of iterations until it achieved the perfect balance of aesthetics and practicality. The project represented more than professional achievement for Damon. Growing up in Seattle's Central District, he'd watched gentrification transform his neighborhood, sometimes for better, often displacing longtime residents who couldn't afford rising rents. Skyline Commons was his attempt to create a development that served the community rather than simply extracting profit from it. 20% of the residential units were designated as affordable housing. The retail spaces prioritized local businesses, and the public areas were designed to welcome everyone, regardless of economic status. Damon's journey to this moment had been anything but conventional. The son of a carpenter and a public school teacher, he discovered architecture through a high school drafting class that captured his imagination. While his classmates saw technical drawings as tedious requirements, Damon saw poetry in precise lines and mathematical relationships. His teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, recognized his talent and encouraged him to pursue architecture despite the financial challenges his family faced. Scholarship programs and student loans made college possible, though not easy. At the University of Washington's architecture program, Damon often felt like an outsider among classmates whose families had connections in the industry. He compensated with longer hours in the studio, more detailed research, and an unwavering commitment to excellence that eventually earned respect from professors and peers alike. After graduation, landing a position at Hartwell & Associates felt like winning the lottery. The firm's reputation for innovative design and commitment to sustainable development aligned perfectly with Damon's values. He'd started as a junior architect, working his way up through talent, dedication, and a unique ability to see solutions where others saw obstacles. The Skyline Commons project had been his first opportunity to serve as lead architect, a promotion that came with both excitement and pressure. Senior partners at the firm had taken a calculated risk in giving him such responsibility, and Damon was determined to prove their confidence was justified. Every decision, from the building's orientation to the selection of sustainable materials, reflected his vision of architecture as a tool for positive social impact. Standing at the construction site's entrance, Damon felt the familiar rush of seeing his vision take physical form. The foundation work was nearly complete, and vertical construction was beginning in earnest. Soon the steel skeleton would be wrapped in glass and concrete, transforming abstract concepts into livable spaces where families would make homes and businesses would thrive. The site bustled with activity as the morning shift arrived. Hard-hatted workers carried tools and materials, their movements choreographed by months of planning and coordination. Damon recognized many faces from previous site visits, though he rarely had extensive interactions with the construction crews. His role typically involved meetings with project managers, structural engineers, and subcontractors, rather than hands-on construction work. Today's visit was prompted by a structural modification request from the general contractor. A conflict between the electrical and plumbing systems in the residential towers required redesigning several utility chases, a change that needed architectural approval before work could proceed. Damon had spent the previous evening revising the affected drawings, ensuring the modifications wouldn't compromise the building's aesthetic or functional integrity. As he approached the site's security checkpoint, Damon noticed increased activity around the tower's base. A concrete pour was scheduled for later that morning, a critical phase that would require precise coordination between multiple crews. The site filled him with anticipation. Each major milestone brought Skyline Commons closer to completion and closer to serving the community it was designed for. The security booth stood at the site's main entrance, a modest structure that served as the gateway between the public sidewalk and the controlled chaos of active construction. A chain-link fence topped with security wire surrounded the entire site, necessary precautions given the valuable equipment and materials stored within. Warning signs posted every few feet reminded visitors of safety requirements and liability limitations. Damon had been through this checkpoint dozens of times over the past 18 months, though usually wearing business attire and arriving in meetings with other professionals. Today was different. The hands-on nature of reviewing structural modifications had prompted him to dress practically: work boots, dark jeans, a flannel shirt, and the hard hat required for site access. He looked like any other construction worker reporting for a shift, which had been his intention. He wanted to blend in, to observe the work from ground level without the formal distance that usually separated architects from builders. The morning air carried the scent of fresh concrete and metal shavings, industrial perfumes that had become oddly comforting to Damon over the months of site visits. Seattle's characteristic drizzle threatened overhead, though the forecast promised clearing skies by afternoon. The weather would be perfect for the concrete pour, with moderate temperatures and minimal wind to complicate the process. Inside the security booth, Frank Morrison was settling into what he expected to be a routine Tuesday morning. At 52, Frank had worked construction security for nearly 2 decades, primarily on large commercial projects throughout the Seattle area. His job was straightforward: verify credentials, check identification, and ensure only authorized personnel entered the site. Safety regulations were strict, and liability concerns made thoroughness essential. Frank prided himself on maintaining order and following protocols. In an industry where a single accident could shut down a project for weeks, security checkpoints served as the first line of defense against unauthorized access. He'd seen too many incidents caused by untrained individuals wandering into dangerous areas, and he took his responsibilities seriously. The morning shift change had brought the usual stream of familiar faces: electricians, plumbers, carpenters, and heavy equipment operators who'd been working Skyline Commons for months. Frank knew most of them by sight, though he still checked identification as required by company policy. Trust was valuable, but documentation was essential. As Damon approached the security booth, Frank looked up from his clipboard and morning coffee. The sight of an unfamiliar face immediately triggered his professional instincts. New workers typically arrived with proper documentation and supervisory introductions, but the man approaching looked confident rather than uncertain, walking with the purposeful stride of someone familiar with construction sites. Frank noticed the hard hat and work clothes, standard attire that suggested legitimate business on the site. However, something about the man's demeanor struck him as unusual. Most construction workers arriving for shifts carrying lunch coolers and tool bags wore company shirts with logos and name patches. This individual carried a portfolio and moved with the measured pace of someone inspecting rather than reporting for work. The moment of approach held potential for routine verification or unexpected complication. Frank prepared to follow standard protocol, while Damon confidently approached what he expected to be a familiar checkpoint. Neither man anticipated that this routine interaction would trigger a chain of events exposing deep-seated assumptions about who belongs in positions of authority within the construction industry. The morning sun climbed higher above Seattle's skyline as workers continued arriving at Skyline Commons, each carrying tools, lunch boxes, and the quiet determination of people committed to building something meaningful. The project represented months of coordinated effort, thousands of hours of skilled labor, and the convergence of multiple industries working toward a common goal. For Damon Mitchell, this Tuesday morning represented another step toward seeing his architectural vision become reality. The structural modifications requiring review were minor in the context of the overall project, but his perfectionist nature demanded personal attention to every detail. Architecture wasn't just drawing pretty pictures, it was about creating spaces that would serve people for decades to come. The security checkpoint ahead represented a threshold between public space and professional domain, between conceptual design and physical construction. Damon had crossed this threshold many times before, but never quite like this. Today, for the first time, he would discover what it felt like to approach his own project as an outsider, to be judged not by his credentials or contributions, but by assumptions based on appearance. The stage was set for a confrontation that would challenge everyone involved to examine their own biases about authority, expertise, and belonging in professional spaces. What began as a routine site visit was about to become a moment of reckoning that would ripple through the construction industry and beyond. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The path that led Damon Mitchell to become Seattle's youngest lead architect at a prestigious firm was paved with determination, late-night study sessions, and an unwavering belief that buildings could change lives. His story began 25 years earlier in a modest two-bedroom house on Cherry Street, where the sounds of construction echoed through the neighborhood as Seattle's tech boom began reshaping the city. Jerome Mitchell had worked construction for 15 years when his son Damon was born. A master carpenter with calloused hands and an artist's eye for detail, Jerome specialized in custom millwork for high-end residential projects. He could transform raw lumber into intricate staircases, built-in bookcases, and decorative trim that added character to otherwise ordinary spaces. Despite his skill, Jerome rarely received recognition beyond a paycheck and occasional compliments from homeowners who noticed exceptional craftsmanship. Damon's mother, Patricia, taught 4th grade at Rainier Elementary, nurturing young minds while advocating for educational equity in Seattle's changing demographics. She possessed infinite patience for struggling students and an intuitive understanding of how different children learned best. Their household valued education, hard work, and community service, principles that would shape Damon's worldview long before he discovered architecture. Growing up, Damon spent countless hours in his father's workshop, a converted garage filled with precision tools, wood shavings, and the intoxicating scent of cedar and pine. Jerome taught his son to read blueprints, measure twice and cut once, and appreciate the satisfaction of creating something beautiful from raw materials. These early lessons instilled respect for skilled trades and understanding that great buildings required both vision and craftsmanship. The central district of Damon's childhood was a vibrant community where families knew their neighbors and children played in streets watched over by multiple sets of caring eyes. The neighborhood's African-American heritage was evident in everything from the barbershop conversations to the Sunday gospel music floating from church windows. Local businesses thrived, family restaurants served comfort food that drew customers from across the city, and community centers hosted youth programs that kept teenagers engaged and dreaming. But change was constant, and sometimes painful. As Damon entered middle school, gentrification began altering the neighborhood's character. Property values climbed rapidly, longtime residents faced displacement pressure, and new development often ignored existing community needs. Young Damon watched elderly neighbors sell homes their families had owned for generations, unable to afford rising property taxes despite decades of investment in the community. These observations sparked his first questions about who made decisions regarding neighborhood development and whether new construction could serve existing residents rather than displacing them. His parents encouraged these discussions, helping him understand complex relationships between economics, politics, and urban planning. Patricia often said that understanding problems was the first step toward solving them, a philosophy that would guide Damon's eventual career choice. Academic excellence came naturally to Damon, particularly in mathematics and science courses where precise thinking yielded clear results. Teachers recognized his analytical mind and encouraged advanced coursework, though he initially showed more interest in engineering than design. The turning point came during his sophomore year at Franklin High School, when a scheduling conflict forced him into technical drawing, an elective he'd never considered. Mrs. Elena Rodriguez had taught technical drawing for 12 years, watching countless students struggle with spatial reasoning and precise measurement. Most enrolled for easy credits, but occasionally she encountered students who grasped the subject's deeper implications. When Damon submitted his first assignment, a detailed orthographic projection of a simple mechanical part, Mrs. Rodriguez immediately recognized exceptional talent. The assignment that changed everything involved designing a hypothetical community center for the Central District. While other students created basic floor plans, Damon spent weeks researching neighborhood demographics, interviewing residents about desired amenities, and incorporating universal design principles he'd learned through independent reading. His final presentation included detailed drawings, material specifications, and a budget analysis that impressed both Mrs. Rodriguez and visiting architecture professionals. Dr. Michael Chang from the University of Washington's architecture program had volunteered to review student work, expecting to offer general encouragement and perhaps identify a few promising candidates for the university's summer preview program. Damon's community center project stopped him cold. The sophisticated understanding of user needs, thoughtful site planning, and innovative solutions to challenging constraints suggested architectural intuition that couldn't be taught. After class, Dr. Chang approached Damon with questions about his career plans and family background. Learning about Jerome's construction experience and Patricia's teaching career, he understood the foundation of Damon's practical knowledge and social consciousness. He spent an hour discussing architecture school requirements, scholarship opportunities, and the profession's potential for social impact, planting seeds that would determine Damon's future direction. That evening, Damon returned home buzzing with excitement and uncertainty. Architecture had never appeared on his radar as a viable career option, seeming reserved for people from privileged backgrounds with family connections and financial resources. Dr. Chang's encouragement felt surreal, but the possibility of designing buildings that served communities rather than displacing them resonated deeply with his values and observations about neighborhood change. Jerome and Patricia listened carefully as their son described the day's revelations. They'd always encouraged his academic pursuits while worrying about practical considerations like college costs and career prospects. Architecture sounded prestigious, but uncertain, requiring years of expensive education with no guarantee of employment. However, they recognized the passion in Damon's voice and his genuine excitement about using design skills for community benefit.
The family spent weeks researching architecture programs, scholarship opportunities, and career paths. They visited the University of Washington campus, toured the architecture building, and met with financial aid counselors who explained support available for first-generation college students. The path forward remained challenging, but no longer impossible, requiring academic excellence, strategic planning, and unwavering determination. Damon's junior and senior years became intense preparation for architecture school. He enrolled in additional mathematics and physics courses, spent summers working construction jobs with his father's connections, and volunteered with Habitat for Humanity to understand affordable housing challenges. Mrs. Rodriguez provided advanced independent study opportunities, allowing him to explore architectural history, sustainable design principles, and computer-aided drafting software. The construction jobs proved particularly valuable, exposing Damon to various trades and helping him understand how architects' drawings translated into physical reality. Electricians, plumbers, and carpenters shared insights about design decisions that simplified or complicated installation work. These experiences taught him to create drawings that were both aesthetically pleasing and constructible, a skill that would distinguish his later professional work. College applications required portfolio development, a process that consumed countless hours during senior year. Damon assembled his best technical drawings, sketches from neighborhood walks, and photographs documenting community spaces he found particularly successful or problematic. The portfolio told a story about a young man passionate about creating inclusive, sustainable architecture that strengthened rather than disrupted existing communities. Acceptance to the University of Washington's competitive architecture program felt like winning the lottery, though scholarship coverage fell short of total expenses. Damon worked campus jobs, applied for additional grants, and lived frugally to minimize student loan debt. His parents contributed what they could while maintaining their own modest household, proud beyond words, but worried about their son's financial burden. Architecture school proved more challenging than anything Damon had previously experienced. Studio projects demanded creativity, technical precision, and time management skills that pushed students to their limits. All-night work sessions became routine as deadlines approached, fueled by coffee, determination, and passion for the craft. The workload was intense, but Damon thrived in an environment where excellence was expected and mediocrity was unacceptable. Social dynamics within the program sometimes proved more difficult than academic requirements. Many classmates came from affluent families with architecture connections, discussing internship opportunities and professional networks that seemed impossibly exclusive. Damon often felt like an outsider, listening to conversations about family vacation homes, European study tours, and summer jobs at prestigious firms that hired based on personal relationships rather than qualifications. Professor David Weinstein taught design studio during Damon's third year, a notoriously demanding course that separated serious architecture students from those merely exploring options. Professor Weinstein had practiced architecture for 20 years before entering academia, bringing real-world experience and uncompromising standards to his teaching. He pushed students to think beyond aesthetics, considering social implications of design decisions and responsibilities architects bear for community impact. The semester's major project involved designing affordable housing for a specific Seattle neighborhood, requiring extensive community engagement and innovative approaches to budget constraints. While some students treated the assignment as an abstract exercise, Damon drew upon his Central District experiences and construction knowledge to create proposals that addressed real needs with practical solutions. His final presentation impressed both Professor Weinstein and visiting critics, earning recognition as the semester's outstanding project. More importantly, the work caught the attention of Sarah Hartwell, founding partner of Hartwell & Associates, who served as an external critic. She approached Damon after presentations, expressing interest in his unique perspective and offering a summer internship at her firm. Hartwell and Associates occupied a converted warehouse in Seattle's Fremont neighborhood, its open studio space filled with natural light and creative energy. The firm specialized in sustainable design and community-focused projects, values that aligned perfectly with Damon's interests and aspirations. Starting as an intern, he absorbed everything possible about professional practice, client relationships, and the business aspects of architecture that weren't taught in school. Sarah Hartwell became an invaluable mentor, recognizing Damon's talent while helping him navigate professional relationships and industry expectations. She'd started her firm 15 years earlier after becoming frustrated with large corporate practices that prioritized profit over social impact. Her commitment to meaningful architecture inspired a team of designers who shared similar values and dedication to excellence. The internship extended into part-time work during Damon's final year of school, providing practical experience while helping finance his education. He contributed to various projects, learning how design concepts evolved through multiple iterations, and how architects balanced client desires with budget realities and regulatory requirements. Each project taught new lessons about the complexity and responsibility of creating spaces where people lived, worked, and gathered. Graduation day arrived with mixed emotions, pride in academic achievement tempered by uncertainty about the future. Architecture school had prepared Damon technically and theoretically, but professional success required skills that couldn't be taught in classrooms. The architecture market was competitive, particularly for recent graduates without family connections or financial cushions to support unpaid internships at prestigious firms.
Sarah Hartwell's offer of full-time employment felt like validation of years of hard work and proof that merit could overcome background disadvantages. The salary was modest but fair, the projects were meaningful, and the learning opportunities seemed limitless. More importantly, Damon would work alongside professionals who shared his commitment to architecture as a tool for positive social change. His first major project involved renovating a community health clinic in South Seattle, transforming a cramped former retail space into a welcoming healthcare facility. The budget was tight, the timeline aggressive, and the stakeholder group included community leaders with strong opinions about design priorities. Damon learned to facilitate meetings, incorporate diverse feedback, and create solutions that satisfied multiple competing interests. The clinic project's success led to increased responsibilities and larger projects. Damon's unique combination of technical skill, community understanding, and construction knowledge made him particularly effective at complex urban developments requiring coordination between multiple agencies and stakeholder groups. His reputation grew within Seattle's architecture community as someone who could navigate challenging projects while maintaining design integrity. 5 years after joining Hartwell and Associates, Damon had become the firm's youngest senior associate, managing multiple projects and mentoring newer staff members. His portfolio included award-winning affordable housing developments, community centers, and mixed-use projects that demonstrated architecture's potential for positive neighborhood impact. The professional success felt deeply satisfying, validation of the path that began in Mrs. Rodriguez's technical drawing classroom. When Sarah Hartwell announced her semi-retirement and the firm's need for new leadership, she personally recommended Damon for promotion to lead architect on Skyline Commons, the largest and most complex project in the firm's history. The appointment represented not just professional advancement, but opportunity to demonstrate how thoughtful design could address urban growth challenges while preserving community character. Now, walking toward the Skyline Commons security checkpoint on Tuesday morning, Damon carried the weight of that responsibility, along with his portfolio of structural modifications. The project represented everything he'd worked toward, the chance to create architecture that served real community needs while pushing the boundaries of sustainable design and social innovation. The security booth at Skyline Commons had been Frank Morrison's domain for 8 months, a temporary assignment that had stretched longer than originally planned when the previous pard quit unexpectedly.
Frank had settled into the routine of checking credentials, monitoring deliveries, and maintaining the delicate balance between security and accessibility that large construction projects required. Pacific Security Solutions had won the contract for Skyline Commons through competitive bidding, emphasizing their experience with high-profile developments and reputation for preventing theft and unauthorized access. The company's training manual stressed vigilance, documentation, and strict adherence to client protocols. Frank had memorized every procedure, understanding that his performance reflected not only on himself, but on Pacific Security's reputation with Meridian Construction, the project's general contractor. Meridian Construction had built their reputation on delivering complex projects on time and under budget, achievements that required meticulous coordination between dozens of subcontractors, suppliers, and regulatory agencies. Site security was a critical component of their risk management strategy, protecting expensive equipment, preventing injuries to unauthorized personnel, and maintaining insurance compliance that kept projects moving forward. The morning shift change at Skyline Commons typically brought familiar faces: electricians from Northwest Power Systems, plumbers from Seattle Mechanical, carpenters from Cascade Woodworking, and equipment operators from various specialty contractors. Frank recognized most workers by sight after months of daily interactions, though company policy still required identification checks for liability protection and accurate attendance records. As Damon approached the security booth, Frank noticed several details that triggered his professional instincts. The man walked with confidence rather than the hurried pace of workers rushing to clock in before shift deadlines. His clothes were clean and pressed, lacking the worn appearance of garments subjected to daily construction work. Most significantly, he carried a portfolio rather than tools, suggesting business purposes rather than manual labor. Frank's experience had taught him that unauthorized visitors often attempted to blend in by dressing appropriately, but subtle details usually revealed their true purpose. Reporters sometimes tried to access sites for research for a story, competitors occasionally attempted industrial espionage, and unfortunately, thieves regularly target construction sites for valuable tools and materials. Vigilance was essential even when dealing with individuals who appeared legitimate. The clipboard on Frank's desk contained the morning's authorized visitor list, a standard document prepared by Meridian's project management office. Site foremen submitted names of expected inspectors, delivery personnel, and other visitors who required temporary access. Frank scanned the list quickly, looking for any entry that might correspond to the approaching individual, but found no matches. Damon reached the security booth's window and offered a polite smile, the same professional courtesy he'd developed through years of client meetings and contractor interactions. He expected the routine credential check that had become standard procedure during his previous site visits, though today's casual attire might require additional explanation about his role as the lead architect.
"Good morning," Damon said, setting his portfolio on the booth's counter. "I'm here for the structural review on the residential towers. There are some utility modifications that need architectural approval before the concrete pour this afternoon." Frank looked up from his clipboard, studying Damon's face with the practiced assessment of someone trained to evaluate potential security risks. The explanation sounded plausible, demonstrating knowledge of ongoing work and project timeline, but the speaker's appearance didn't match Frank's expectations for an architect conducting site reviews. "I'll need to see some identification and check you against our visitor authorization list," Frank replied, his tone professional but cautious. "What company are you with?" "Hartwell and Associates," Damon answered, reaching for his wallet to retrieve his driver's license and business cards. "I'm Damon Mitchell, the lead architect on this project. I've been here dozens of times over the past 18 months, though usually for scheduled meetings with different clothing." Frank accepted the identification documents, comparing the photo to the man standing before him. The driver's license appeared legitimate, showing a Seattle address and matching physical description. The business card listed Damon Mitchell, Senior Architect, with Hartwell and Associates logo and contact information. However, Frank's training emphasized that documents could be forged and that verbal claims required verification through proper channels. "I don't see your name on today's authorized visitor list," Frank said, holding up the clipboard for Damon to see. "Project management prepares this every morning based on scheduled appointments and expected deliveries. If you're supposed to be here, someone should have notified security in advance." Damon frowned, reaching into his portfolio to retrieve his phone. "That's strange. Let me call the project office and see what happened. Maybe there was a communication issue with the scheduling." As Damon scrolled through his contacts, Frank observed his reactions and body language for signs of deception or nervousness. The man appeared genuinely puzzled rather than defensive, suggesting either innocence or sophisticated preparation. Frank had encountered both scenarios during his security career, learning that appearances could be deceiving and that thorough verification was always necessary. The construction site beyond the security checkpoint buzzed with morning activity as workers prepared for the day's scheduled concrete pour. Massive trucks lined up outside the site's delivery entrance, their rotating drums loaded with precisely mixed concrete that would form the residential tower's next floor level. The timing was critical. Concrete had to be poured continuously to avoid weak joints that could compromise structural integrity. Tom Bradley, Meridian Construction's project superintendent, arrived at his trailer office carrying coffee and the day's revised schedule. At 45, Tom had managed construction projects across the Pacific Northwest for nearly 2 decades, developing an intuitive understanding of the coordination required to keep complex developments moving forward. Skyline Commons represented the largest project of his career, a professional milestone that would establish his reputation for future opportunities. The morning's concrete pour required precise timing between multiple trades. Reinforcing steel had to be properly positioned, electrical conduits needed final inspection, and concrete pumping equipment required careful placement to reach every section of the floor level. Tom's phone buzzed constantly with updates from subcontractors, suppliers, and city inspectors whose approval was necessary before work could proceed. Meanwhile, at Hartwell & Associates' office in Fremont, Sarah Hartwell reviewed the day's schedule while sipping herbal tea and scanning architectural trade publications. The firm's success with Skyline Commons had generated inquiries about similar projects, creating opportunities for expansion that would require careful consideration of staffing and resources. Damon's leadership on the project had exceeded all expectations, demonstrating readiness for increased responsibilities and client relationships. Sarah's assistant, Jennifer Kim, arrived early to prepare for a busy day of client calls and project coordination. Jennifer had worked for the firm for 3 years, starting as a receptionist and gradually taking on administrative responsibilities that supported the architect's creative work. She understood the rhythm of project deadlines and the importance of clear communication between the office and active construction sites. Back at the security checkpoint, Damon finished dialing Tom Bradley's direct number, expecting to resolve the visitor authorization issue with a quick phone call. Tom would confirm Damon's identity and expected arrival, allowing the security guard to update his records and grant site access. The concrete pour schedule made timing important, but a few minutes of administrative coordination wouldn't compromise the day's work. Tom's phone rang in his trailer, but he was already heading to the tower's base to coordinate final preparations for the concrete delivery. His phone stayed on his desk, charging while displaying missed call notifications that wouldn't be noticed until he returned for the next scheduled check-in with subcontractors and city inspectors. Frank watched Damon attempt to reach the project office, noting the genuine frustration that appeared when calls went to voicemail. Either the man was an excellent actor, or he legitimately expected someone to answer and confirm his authorization. Frank's training emphasized maintaining professional skepticism while treating all visitors with courtesy and respect. "The project office isn't answering," Damon said, ending his unsuccessful call attempt. "Tom Bradley is probably coordinating the concrete pour preparation. Let me try calling my office to have them contact Meridian directly." Frank nodded, though his concern was growing rather than diminishing. Legitimate visitors typically arrived with proper authorization, and project management rarely failed to notify security about expected arrivals. The man's persistence could indicate either determination to access the site illegitimately or genuine frustration with administrative oversight.
At Hartwell & Associates, Jennifer Kim answered Damon's call on the second ring, immediately recognizing his number on the office phone system. "Good morning, Damon. How's the site visit going?" "I'm having some trouble with security clearance," Damon explained, keeping his voice low to avoid appearing confrontational to Frank. "The guard says I'm not on today's authorized visitor list, and Tom Bradley isn't answering his phone. Can you call Meridian's office and have them add me to the security list?" Jennifer quickly accessed the firm's project database, locating Tom Bradley's contact information and Meridian Construction's main office number. "Of course, let me call them right now and sort this out. It shouldn't take more than a few minutes to get you cleared." While Jennifer worked to resolve the authorization issue, Frank found himself in an increasingly uncomfortable position. The man claiming to be an architect had provided identification, demonstrated knowledge of the project, and was actively working to verify his credentials through proper channels. However, security protocols existed for important reasons, and Frank couldn't simply grant access based on verbal claims and business cards. The morning sun climbed higher over Seattle's construction site, casting sharper shadows as work crews prepared for the critical concrete pour. Equipment operators positioned pumping machinery, ensuring adequate reach to all sections of the residential tower's next floor level. The choreographed coordination between dozens of workers represented months of planning and preparation, with safety and quality depending on precise execution. Damon checked his watch, noting that time was passing while administrative confusion prevented him from reviewing the structural modifications that required architectural approval. The concrete pour couldn't proceed without his sign-off on the utility revisions, potentially delaying the entire schedule if this security issue wasn't resolved quickly. Frank consulted his training manual's procedures for handling disputed access requests, seeking guidance for situations where visitors claimed authorization that couldn't be immediately verified. The manual emphasized erring on the side of caution while maintaining professional courtesy, recommendations that sometimes conflicted in real-world applications. The tension at the security checkpoint was subtle but growing, as both men found themselves in positions that challenged their professional expectations. Damon had never encountered access difficulties at his own project, while Frank faced a situation that didn't fit neatly into his established protocols for handling unauthorized visitors or legitimate oversight. Jennifer Kim's call to Meridian Construction's main office revealed the source of the authorization confusion. The project management assistant who typically prepared daily visitor lists had called in sick, and her replacement wasn't familiar with regular consultants who required site access. The oversight was innocent but problematic, creating exactly the kind of communication breakdown that construction projects worked hard to prevent. "I've reached Meridian's office," Jennifer told Damon during a callback. "They're updating the visitor authorization list right now and will call security directly to confirm your clearance. This should be resolved in just a few minutes." Damon relayed this information to Frank, who appreciated the professional approach to resolving the authorization issue. Proper verification through official channels was exactly what security protocols required, even if the process was more time-consuming than anyone preferred. However, Frank's radio crackled with a message from Pacific Security's dispatch office, relaying a routine reminder about recent equipment thefts at construction sites throughout the Seattle area. The timing was coincidental but unfortunate, reinforcing Frank's natural caution about granting access to individuals whose authorization couldn't be immediately confirmed. The concrete delivery trucks idled outside the site's main entrance, their drivers checking watches and calculating schedule margins that determined whether the day's pour could proceed as planned. Construction schedules allowed little flexibility for delays, particularly when weather conditions and material properties created narrow windows for critical work phases. As administrative wheels turned slowly to resolve the security clearance issue, both Damon and Frank found themselves caught in a bureaucratic tangle that highlighted the complex coordination required for large construction projects. What should have been a routine site visit was becoming an extended negotiation that tested everyone's patience and professionalism. The stage was set for escalation as time pressure mounted and frustration grew on both sides of the security checkpoint window. Neither man could have anticipated how a simple authorization oversight would soon evolve into a confrontation that challenged assumptions about identity, authority, and professional credibility in the construction industry. 20 minutes had passed since Damon first approached the security checkpoint, and what began as a routine administrative issue was transforming into something more troubling. The morning sun had climbed higher, casting harsh shadows across the construction site as concrete trucks continued their patient wait outside the delivery entrance. Time was becoming a critical factor, with the scheduled pour requiring precise coordination that couldn't accommodate indefinite delays. Frank Morrison shifted uncomfortably in his chair, repeatedly checking his radio for confirmation from Meridian Construction's office about the visitor authorization update. His training manual provided clear guidance for most security situations, but this scenario fell into an uncomfortable gray area where protocols conflicted with practical considerations and professional courtesy. The radio finally crackled with a message from Pacific Security's dispatch center. Unit 47, this is dispatch. Meridian Construction confirms they have an architect expected on site this morning for structural review. Authorization is being processed through their main office. Stand by for further updates.
Frank felt a mixture of relief and continued caution. The message confirmed that someone from Hartwell and Associates was indeed expected, but it didn't specifically verify the identity of the man standing before him. Security protocols required positive identification, not just confirmation that someone with architectural credentials was supposed to arrive. "Looks like your office contacted the right people," Frank told Damon, his tone slightly more relaxed but still professional. "They're processing the authorization now. Should just be a few more minutes." Damon checked his watch again, noting that the delay was eating into the narrow window available for reviewing structural modifications before the concrete pour. His frustration was building, not just with the bureaucratic inefficiency, but with the growing sense that this level of scrutiny was unusual and potentially discriminatory. During his previous site visits, dressed in business attire and arriving with scheduled appointments, security checks had been perfunctory. Guards had recognized him, waved him through with minimal documentation review, and treated him with the automatic deference typically afforded to professional consultants. Today's extended interrogation felt different, more suspicious, and less respectful. The construction site beyond the security checkpoint buzzed with increasing urgency as work crews prepared for the concrete pour. Equipment operators had positioned pumping machinery according to carefully planned sequences that would ensure continuous flow to all sections of the residential tower's next floor level. The coordination represented months of planning, with safety protocols and quality standards requiring precise execution. Tom Bradley emerged from the residential tower's base, where he'd been coordinating final inspections with city building officials and subcontractor Foreman. His radio buzzed constantly with updates from various crews, suppliers, and inspectors whose approval was necessary before concrete delivery could begin. The morning schedule was tight, with weather conditions providing a narrow window for optimal concrete placement. As Tom walked toward his trailer office to retrieve project documents and check messages, he noticed unusual activity at the security checkpoint. Typically, morning access was routine, with familiar workers passing through quickly after brief identification checks. The extended conversation between the security guard and an unfamiliar individual suggested some kind of problem that might require his attention. Frank's radio crackled again, this time with a different message that would escalate the situation dramatically. Unit 47, be advised that Seattle PD reports increased construction site theft activity in the downtown corridor. Remain vigilant for unauthorized access attempts. Several suspects have been using false credentials and posing as contractors or consultants. The timing of this warning couldn't have been worse.
Frank's natural caution, already heightened by the authorization confusion, now received official reinforcement from law enforcement agencies tracking construction site crime. The man claiming to be an architect might be legitimate, but the police bulletin reminded Frank that criminals often used sophisticated deception to gain access to valuable equipment and materials. Frank studied Damon more carefully, looking for signs that might indicate criminal intent rather than legitimate business. The clean work clothes could be a disguise. The portfolio could contain tools for theft rather than architectural drawings. The confident demeanor could reflect experience with deception rather than professional authority. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step back from the window while I make some additional verification calls. Recent security bulletins require extra caution with unscheduled visitors." Damon felt a chill of recognition as Frank's attitude shifted from cautious professionalism to active suspicion of criminal activity. The change was subtle but unmistakable, transforming him from a potentially legitimate visitor into a possible security threat. The psychological impact was immediate and painful, triggering memories of countless similar moments when his competence and integrity had been questioned based on appearance rather than credentials. "I understand security concerns," Damon replied, fighting to keep his voice calm and professional. "But I've provided identification and my office has confirmed the appointment. How much additional verification do you need?" Frank consulted his manual again, looking for guidance on handling suspected false ID cases. The procedures emphasized thorough documentation and involving supervisory personnel when suspicious activity was detected. The manual also authorized security guards to detain individuals suspected of criminal activity until law enforcement could respond. "I'm going to need you to remain here while I contact my supervisor and verify your credentials through additional channels," Frank announced, reaching for his radio. Company policy requires thorough investigation of any access request that can't be immediately verified. The word "remain" carried implications that transformed the interaction from voluntary cooperation to involuntary detention. Damon felt his pulse quicken as he realized the situation was escalating beyond administrative confusion into active suspicion of criminal activity. The injustice was staggering. He was being treated as a potential criminal at his own project, a building he had designed and shepherded through months of development. "You're asking me to remain here?" Damon repeated, his voice rising slightly despite his efforts to maintain composure. "I'm the lead architect on this project. I've been working on Skyline Commons for 2 years. This is my building."
Frank's training had taught him that criminals often became agitated when their deception was challenged, and that claims of authority or ownership were common tactics used to avoid detection. The man's rising emotional state could indicate either legitimate frustration or guilty consciousness. But security protocols required assuming the worst until proven otherwise. Several construction workers approaching the site entrance slowed their pace as they noticed the tense conversation at the security checkpoint. Word spread quickly through the morning shift that something unusual was happening, drawing curious glances and whispered speculation about the nature of the delay. Marcus Washington, a journeyman electrician with Northwest Power Systems, recognized the signs of a confrontation developing. He worked construction for 15 years, witnessing various disputes between security personnel and workers over access rights, documentation requirements, and territorial authority. However, this situation felt different, with racial undertones that made him uncomfortable as a fellow African-American professional. "Is everything okay over there?" Marcus called out as he approached the checkpoint, his question directed toward Damon rather than Frank. The gesture of solidarity was subtle but meaningful, acknowledging the possibility that discrimination might be influencing the security guard's aggressive approach. Frank immediately became defensive, interpreting Marcus's question as an attempt to interfere with legitimate security procedures. His training emphasized maintaining control of situations and preventing unauthorized individuals from disrupting investigations or creating safety hazards. "This is a security matter,"
Frank announced, loud enough for nearby workers to hear. "Please proceed to your work areas and allow me to handle this situation appropriately." The public nature of Frank's declaration transformed a private dispute into a spectacle witnessed by dozens of construction workers beginning their morning shifts. Damon felt the familiar sting of public humiliation, the psychological wound inflicted when professional competence was questioned in front of peers and colleagues. Tom Bradley noticed the commotion from his trailer office and decided to investigate personally. Site security was his responsibility as project superintendent, and any prolonged dispute at the main entrance could disrupt the carefully coordinated concrete pour schedule. He grabbed his radio and hard hat, preparing to assess the situation and restore normal operations. As Tom approached the security checkpoint, he immediately recognized the potential for serious problems. The concrete trucks were on a tight schedule, city inspectors were waiting for final approvals, and dozens of workers were being delayed by whatever was happening at the entrance. Construction projects operated on narrow margins that couldn't accommodate extended disruptions. "What's the situation here?" Tom asked Frank, his authority as project superintendent immediately evident in his tone and demeanor. "We've got a concrete pour scheduled and crews waiting to begin work." Frank felt relief at Tom's arrival, viewing the project superintendent as the appropriate authority to handle complex security decisions. He quickly explained the authorization confusion, the police bulletin about construction site theft, and his concerns about granting access to someone whose credentials couldn't be immediately verified. "This individual claims to be the lead architect from Hartwell and Associates, but he's not on today's visitor's authorization list, and I've received warnings about criminals using false credentials to access construction sites." Tom looked at Damon for the first time, taking in the work clothes, hard hat, and portfolio that marked him either as a construction professional or someone attempting to appear as one. Tom had worked with various architects over his career, but rarely saw them dressed in practical site attire rather than business suits that emphasized their professional status. "I am Damon Mitchell from Hartwell and Associates," Damon said directly to Tom, hoping that project-level authority could resolve the situation more effectively than security protocols. "I'm here to review the structural modifications on the residential towers before this afternoon's concrete pour. Sarah Hartwell assigned me as lead architect when the project began." Tom's expression remained neutral as he processed this information. He knew that Hartwell and Associates was indeed the architectural firm for Skyline Commons, and he was aware that structural modifications required architectural approval before concrete placement could proceed. However, he had minimal direct contact with the firm's staff, typically working through project managers and senior partners rather than individual architects. The name Damon Mitchell was vaguely familiar from project correspondence and meeting notes, but Tom couldn't definitively confirm the identity of the man standing before him. The cautious approach suggested by the security guard seemed prudent, given the potential consequences of allowing unauthorized access to an active construction site. "I appreciate your patience with our security procedures, but I'm sure you understand that we have to be careful about site access. Let me make some calls to verify your identity and get this resolved quickly." Damon felt his professional world tilting as even the project superintendent treated him with suspicion rather than recognition. 2 years of work on Skyline Commons, dozens of site visits, and countless hours of coordination with Meridian Construction had apparently created no lasting impression of his role or authority. The realization was both professionally insulting and personally devastating. The concrete trucks continued their patient wait as administrative wheels turned slowly to resolve an identity crisis that should never have occurred. Workers streamed past the security checkpoint, some offering sympathetic glances toward Damon, while others studiously avoided eye contact with the unfolding drama. The situation had reached a critical point where personal dignity, professional reputation, and project schedules converged in a moment that would test everyone's character and judgment.
The morning sun climbed higher over Seattle as tensions escalated toward an inevitable confrontation that would expose uncomfortable truths about assumptions, authority, and respect in the construction industry. The tension at the security checkpoint had reached a breaking point when Sarah Hartwell's silver Audi pulled into the construction site's visitor parking area. At 52, Sarah commanded respect throughout Seattle's architecture community, not just for her firm's innovative designs, but for her unwavering commitment to professional excellence and social responsibility. She had arrived unexpectedly to personally address the structural modifications that were delaying the concrete pour. Sarah had received Jennifer Kim's frantic call about the security clearance issue 20 minutes earlier. Initially, she assumed it was a simple administrative oversight that could be resolved with a phone call to Meridian Construction's office. However, when Jennifer's follow-up call revealed that the situation was escalating rather than resolving, Sarah decided that direct intervention was necessary. As the founder of Hartwell & Associates and Damon's mentor for nearly a decade, Sarah had watched him develop from a promising intern into one of the most talented architects in the Pacific Northwest. His work on Skyline Commons represented the culmination of years of professional growth, and she was not about to let bureaucratic confusion undermine his authority or the project's timeline. Sarah approached the security checkpoint with the confident stride of someone accustomed to solving problems through direct action. Her professional attire, tailored blazer, pressed slacks, and polished shoes immediately marked her as an executive rather than a construction worker. The contrast with Damon's practical site clothing would soon become a powerful illustration of how appearance influenced perception in professional settings. "Excuse me," Sarah announced as she reached the security booth, her voice carrying the authority of someone used to commanding attention in boardrooms and construction trailers. "I'm Sarah Hartwell, founding partner of Hartwell & Associates. I understand there's some confusion about my lead architect's site access." Frank Morrison looked up from his radio conversation with Pacific Security's supervisor, immediately recognizing the type of high-level professional who could resolve authorization disputes with a single phone call. Sarah's appearance and demeanor matched his expectations for an architectural firm's senior partner, confirming his assumptions about who belonged in positions of authority. "Yes, ma'am," Frank replied, his tone becoming noticeably more deferential. "We've had some difficulty verifying credentials for this individual who claims to work for your firm. Security protocols require careful documentation, especially with recent theft warnings from Seattle PD." Sarah's eyes flashed with anger as she processed Frank's words. The phrase, "this individual who claims," immediately revealed the nature of the problem. She turned toward Damon, taking in his frustrated expression and the portfolio of project drawings he still held, then looked back at Frank with barely controlled fury. "Claims to work for my firm?" Sarah repeated, her voice rising with indignation. "Damon Mitchell is the lead architect on this project. He designed every beam, every foundation detail, every architectural element you see rising behind you. How dare you question his credentials?" Tom Bradley, who had been radioing Meridian's main office for additional verification, stopped mid-conversation as he witnessed Sarah's arrival and immediate defense of Damon. The project superintendent realized he was observing something far more significant than a simple security mix-up. This was a confrontation about professional respect and institutional bias. The construction workers who had gathered near the security checkpoint fell silent as they watched the drama unfold. Marcus Washington, the electrician who had earlier offered solidarity, felt a mixture of validation and anger as the situation's racial dynamics became undeniable. Other workers exchanged uncomfortable glances, recognizing that they were witnessing discrimination in action. Sarah pulled out her phone and speed-dialed a number that connected directly to David Meridian, CEO of Meridian Construction and the project's ultimate authority. Her relationship with David spanned 15 years and multiple successful projects, giving her direct access to decision-makers who could resolve this situation immediately. David, this is Sarah Hartwell. I'm standing at your Skyline Commons security checkpoint where my lead architect is being detained because your security guard doesn't believe he's qualified to be here. This is unacceptable and potentially illegal. David Meridian's voice was audible to everyone near the checkpoint as he responded with obvious concern. Sarah, what's happening? Tom Bradley is my project superintendent on site. Let me speak with him immediately. Tom Bradley reluctantly took Sarah's phone, knowing that he was about to explain to his company's CEO why the project's lead architect had been treated as a potential criminal. The conversation was brief but intense, with David's questions becoming increasingly pointed as he understood the scope of the problem. "Mr. Meridian wants to speak with you," Tom said to Frank, his voice tight with the stress of a situation spiraling beyond his control. "Now."
Frank took the phone with growing apprehension, realizing that his careful adherence to security protocols might have created a much larger problem than the unauthorized access he was trying to prevent. David Meridian's reputation for demanding accountability from every level of his organization was well known throughout the construction industry. "This is Frank Morrison, sir," he said into the phone, his voice betraying nervousness for the first time that morning. David's response was immediate and unmistakable. "Mr. Morrison, you are currently detaining the architect who designed the building you're supposed to be protecting. Damon Mitchell has complete site access authorization at all times, for any reason, in any attire. Is that absolutely clear?" "Yes, sir," Frank replied, feeling his professional world shifting beneath him. "I was following protocol for unscheduled visitors, and there are no unscheduled visits when it comes to the lead architect. He has permanent authorization that supersedes your daily visitor lists. Release him immediately and apologize for this embarrassment." As Frank handed the phone back to Sarah, the power dynamics at the security checkpoint had completely reversed. Damon was no longer a suspicious individual requiring verification. He was the project's chief designer, whose authority exceeded that of everyone present except possibly David Meridian himself. Sarah pocketed her phone and turned to address the crowd of construction workers who had witnessed the confrontation. Her voice carried across the site entrance, ensuring that everyone understood what had just occurred and what it represented. "Damon Mitchell is one of the most talented architects I've ever worked with. He earned his position through excellence, dedication, and vision. The fact that his expertise was questioned because of his appearance is a disgrace to our industry and our values." The impact of Sarah's words rippled through the assembled workers like a physical force. Some nodded in agreement, recognizing the injustice they had witnessed. Others looked uncomfortable, perhaps examining their own assumptions about professional authority and competence. A few appeared genuinely shocked that such blatant discrimination could occur at a modern construction site. Marcus Washington stepped forward from the crowd, removing his hard hat in a gesture of respect. "Mr. Mitchell, I want to apologize for what happened here today. You deserve better from all of us." His words opened floodgates of support from other workers who had remained silent during the confrontation. Electricians, plumbers, carpenters, and equipment operators began expressing their own apologies and recognition of Damon's authority. The spontaneous show of solidarity was both healing and humbling. Tom Bradley approached Damon directly, his face flushed with embarrassment about his role in the situation. "Mr. Mitchell, I sincerely apologize for not recognizing you and for allowing this to escalate. There's no excuse for what happened here today." Damon felt a complex mixture of emotions as the apologies and recognition flowed around him. The validation was meaningful, but it couldn't erase the humiliation of being questioned and detained at his own project. The incident had revealed uncomfortable truths about assumptions and biases that lurked beneath the construction industry's professional surface. "I appreciate everyone's support," Damon said, his voice steady despite the emotional turmoil he was experiencing. "But this isn't just about me. It's about every professional who's ever been judged by appearance rather than qualifications. We have to do better." Sarah placed a supportive hand on Damon's shoulder, her pride in his measured response evident in her expression. "That's exactly why you're the right person to lead this project. Architecture isn't just about designing buildings. It's about creating spaces where everyone is welcome and respected." Frank Morrison stood beside his security booth, now understanding that his adherence to protocol had masked unconscious biases that led him to treat a qualified professional as a potential criminal. The training he'd received emphasized vigilance and verification, but it hadn't addressed the subtle ways that racial assumptions could influence security decisions. The concrete trucks continued their patient wait outside the delivery entrance, their drivers checking schedules and calculating the remaining window for optimal concrete placement. The morning's dramatic confrontation had consumed precious time, but the more important work of addressing systemic bias was just beginning. David Meridian's voice crackled over Tom Bradley's radio with instructions that would reshape security procedures immediately. "All site personnel are to be briefed about this incident. I want explicit training about professional respect and unconscious bias. This will never happen again on any Meridian project." The commitment to change extended beyond immediate apologies to institutional reforms that could prevent similar incidents. Sarah and Damon began discussing additional measures that Hartwell and Associates could implement to address bias in architectural practice and construction coordination. As the crowd of workers gradually dispersed to begin their daily tasks, the security checkpoint returned to its routine function. However, the morning's events had permanently altered the site's social dynamics. Frank would spend the rest of his assignment reflecting on how unconscious assumptions had led him to make decisions that contradicted both company policy and basic professional courtesy.
Jennifer Kim arrived at the site 20 minutes later, having driven from the Hartwell and Associates office with additional documentation to support Damon's credentials. She found him reviewing structural modifications with Tom Bradley, their professional relationship restored, but fundamentally changed by the morning's events. "I brought extra authorization letters and project documentation," Jennifer said, then paused as she noticed the tension still evident in everyone's demeanor. "What happened here?" Sarah provided a brief summary of the confrontation, while Damon focused on the technical drawings that required review before concrete placement could proceed. The work had to continue despite the emotional exhaustion that discrimination inevitably created, though the incident would influence every future interaction at the site. The structural modifications were relatively minor, adjustments to utility routing that required architectural approval to ensure they didn't compromise the building's design integrity. Damon's review was thorough and efficient, his professional competence evident to everyone present. The irony wasn't lost on anyone that the man who had been questioned about site access was now providing expertise that kept the entire project moving forward. As the concrete pour finally began later that morning, workers throughout the site carried with them the memory of what they had witnessed at the security checkpoint. Some would reflect on their own biases and commit to more inclusive professional behavior. Others would dismiss the incident as an isolated mistake that didn't reflect broader systemic issues. For Damon, the morning represented both professional vindication and personal trauma. His authority had been restored and his expertise acknowledged, but the psychological wounds inflicted by discrimination would take longer to heal.
The incident would influence his approach to future projects and his commitment to creating more inclusive professional environments. The revelation that transformed a security dispute into a teachable moment about bias and respect had changed everyone involved. The construction site would continue rising toward completion, but the people building it had been fundamentally altered by confronting uncomfortable truths about assumptions, authority, and the work that remained to be done in creating truly inclusive professional spaces. The concrete pour proceeded flawlessly that afternoon, with Damon's approved structural modifications ensuring perfect coordination between architectural design and construction reality. As the massive pumping trucks delivered thousands of cubic yards of concrete to form the residential tower's next floor level, the morning's confrontation felt like a distant memory overshadowed by the satisfaction of technical precision and collaborative teamwork. However, beneath the surface of resumed normalcy, profound changes were already taking root throughout Meridian construction and the broader Seattle construction community. David Meridian had spent his lunch break drafting company-wide policy revisions that would prevent future incidents while addressing the systemic issues that had allowed discrimination to flourish under the guise of security protocols. Within 48 hours of the incident, Meridian Construction announced the implementation of comprehensive bias training for all employees, from entry-level workers to senior executives. The program would address unconscious assumptions about professional competence, authority recognition, and the subtle ways that racial stereotypes influenced workplace interactions. Frank Morrison would be the first employee required to complete the training, followed by every security contractor working on Meridian projects. Pacific Security Solutions faced its own reckoning as news of the incident reached company headquarters. The firm's reputation depended on professional competence and client satisfaction, both of which had been compromised by Frank's handling of the situation. Within a week, Pacific Security announced revised training protocols that emphasized cultural competency alongside traditional security procedures. Frank Morrison found himself at the center of industry-wide discussions about bias in construction security. His initial reaction was defensive, clinging to the belief that he had simply followed established protocols and responded appropriately to security concerns. However, mandatory counseling sessions and bias training gradually helped him understand how unconscious assumptions had influenced his decision-making process. The transformation wasn't immediate or easy. Frank struggled with acknowledging that his professional judgment had been clouded by racial stereotypes, particularly when he had always considered himself free from prejudice. The counseling process revealed how subtle biases could operate below conscious awareness, affecting decisions without explicit discriminatory intent. 3 months after the incident, Frank wrote a personal letter to Damon, acknowledging the harm his actions had caused and expressing genuine remorse for the humiliation and professional disrespect. The letter represented a significant step in Frank's own journey toward greater cultural awareness and personal accountability. Meanwhile, Tom Bradley implemented immediate changes to Skyline Commons' daily operations that went far beyond security procedures. He instituted regular meetings between management and trade workers to discuss concerns about workplace respect and professional recognition. These sessions created space for honest conversations about bias, stereotypes, and the importance of treating all professionals with dignity, regardless of their appearance or background. The construction workers who had witnessed the morning's confrontation became unexpected advocates for workplace equity. Marcus Washington organized informal discussions during lunch breaks where crew members shared their own experiences with discrimination and brainstormed ways to create more inclusive job sites. These grassroots conversations complemented the formal training programs mandated by company leadership.
The incident's ripple effects extended throughout Seattle's architecture and construction communities as word spread about what had happened at Skyline Commons.
Professional organizations began examining their own practices and policies, questioning whether similar biases might be operating within their own institutions. The American Institute of Architects Seattle chapter invited Damon to speak at their monthly meeting about his experience and the broader implications for professional practice. His presentation, titled Designing Inclusion: Architecture's Role in Workplace Equity, drew the largest attendance in the chapter's recent history and sparked ongoing discussions about diversity, representation, and bias in architectural education and practice. Seattle's Associated General Contractors Organization followed suit, organizing a symposium on Building Inclusive Workplaces that featured presentations from Damon, Sarah Hartwell, and David Meridian. The event attracted contractors, architects, engineers, and construction workers who were committed to addressing systemic bias in their industry. At Hartwell & Associates, Sarah Hartwell used the incident as a catalyst for examining the firm's own practices and policies. She instituted regular reviews of project coordination procedures to ensure that all team members received appropriate recognition and respect from contractors and clients. The firm also expanded its mentoring programs to support emerging professionals from underrepresented backgrounds. Damon's role within the firm evolved significantly following the incident. Sarah promoted him to associate partner, recognizing not only his technical expertise, but also his leadership in addressing workplace equity issues. The promotion came with increased responsibilities for firm management and business development, areas where Damon's unique perspective would prove invaluable. The Skyline Commons project itself became a symbol of positive change within the construction industry. Media coverage of the incident and its aftermath drew attention to the innovative design features that Damon had incorporated to serve diverse community needs. The affordable housing component, accessible public spaces, and support for local businesses demonstrated how thoughtful architecture could address social equity alongside aesthetic and functional requirements. City officials took notice of the project's inclusive design approach and began incorporating similar requirements into future development projects. Seattle's planning department established new guidelines encouraging affordable housing integration, community input processes, and accessibility standards that went beyond minimum legal requirements. The incident also prompted changes in how architectural firms coordinated with construction teams. Many firms began providing detailed information about their professional staff to general contractors, including photographs and role descriptions that would help construction personnel recognize and respect consulting professionals regardless of their attire or appearance. Professional development programs expanded to address bias and inclusion issues that had previously received minimal attention. Architecture schools began incorporating diversity and equity topics into their curricula, preparing future practitioners to navigate and address workplace discrimination. Construction management programs added cultural competency training to their core requirements. The concrete that was poured on that October morning eventually supported apartments where diverse families would make their homes, retail spaces where local entrepreneurs would build their businesses, and community areas where neighbors would gather across racial and economic lines. The building's physical structure embodied the inclusive values that Damon had designed into every detail, while its construction process had catalyzed broader changes in industry practices. 6 months after the incident, a follow-up article in a prominent architecture magazine featured interviews with all the principal figures involved in the confrontation. Frank Morrison spoke candidly about his journey toward greater cultural awareness and the ongoing work required to address unconscious bias. Tom Bradley described the changes implemented at Meridian Construction and their positive impact on workplace culture. Sarah Hartwell reflected on her firm's expanded commitment to diversity and inclusion, while David Meridian outlined industry-wide initiatives that his company was leading to address systemic bias in construction practices. The article's most powerful sections featured Damon's insights about the psychological impact of workplace discrimination and his vision for creating more equitable professional environments. The transformation wasn't limited to individual companies or projects. Professional licensing boards began requiring continuing education courses on bias and cultural competency. Industry conferences allocated significant programming time to diversity and inclusion topics. Trade unions implemented bias training for their members and leadership. Construction technology companies developed new tools to improve project coordination and communication, reducing opportunities for misunderstandings about professional roles and responsibilities. Digital platforms began including detailed professional profiles and photos to help team members recognize and respect each other's expertise. The incident's aftermath also highlighted the importance of allyship in addressing workplace discrimination. Sarah Hartwell's immediate and forceful intervention had been crucial in resolving the situation and preventing further escalation. Her example inspired other senior professionals to take active roles in supporting colleagues who faced bias or discrimination. Marcus Washington's early expression of solidarity had provided crucial moral support during Damon's most vulnerable moment. His leadership in organizing worker discussions about bias created pathways for grassroots change that complemented top-down policy initiatives. The combination of executive leadership and worker advocacy proved essential for creating lasting transformation. The legal implications of the incident prompted companies throughout the construction industry to review their policies and training programs to ensure compliance with anti-discrimination laws. Legal experts conducted seminars on avoiding liability while creating inclusive workplaces, helping employers understand both their moral obligations and practical business interests in addressing bias.
Insurance companies began offering premium discounts for construction firms that implemented comprehensive bias training and inclusion programs. The business case for workplace equity became increasingly clear as companies discovered that inclusive practices improved employee satisfaction, reduced turnover, and enhanced their reputations with clients and partners. Research institutions began studying the incident as a case study in workplace bias and organizational change. Academic papers analyzed the factors that contributed to the confrontation, the effectiveness of various intervention strategies, and the long-term impacts of policy reforms. These studies informed best practices that other organizations could adapt to their own contexts. The Skyline Commons project neared completion 1 year after the security checkpoint incident, with Damon overseeing final details and coordinating move-in procedures for the first residents. The building's success as both an architectural achievement and a model for inclusive development had generated inquiries from developers throughout the Pacific Northwest who wanted to replicate its approach. As families began moving into their new apartments and businesses opened in the ground floor retail spaces, the building fulfilled its promise as a catalyst for positive community development. The affordable housing units provided opportunities for teachers, service workers, and young professionals to remain in Seattle despite rising housing costs. The public spaces hosted community events that brought together residents from different backgrounds and income levels. The incident that had threatened to undermine Damon's professional authority ultimately strengthened his reputation and influence within the architecture community. Speaking engagements, consulting opportunities, and collaborative projects flowed from his enhanced visibility as both a talented designer and an advocate for workplace equity. Young architects and construction professionals began seeking Damon as a mentor, drawn by his technical expertise and his commitment to creating inclusive professional environments. His mentoring style emphasized both excellence and empathy, helping emerging professionals navigate industry challenges while maintaining their values and sense of purpose. The transformation initiated by a single morning's confrontation continued rippling outward through professional networks, educational institutions, and industry organizations. The incident had exposed uncomfortable truths about bias and discrimination in construction, but it had also demonstrated the potential for positive change when individuals and organizations committed to doing better. The concrete foundation poured that October morning supported not just a building, but a renewed commitment to respect, dignity, and inclusion in professional practice. The structure rising above it embodied both architectural innovation and social progress, serving as a permanent reminder that meaningful change was possible when people had the courage to confront injustice and work together toward solutions. 2 years after the security checkpoint incident that shook Seattle's construction industry, Damon Mitchell stood on the rooftop terrace of Skyline Commons, surveying a cityscape that had been transformed not just by new buildings,
but by new approaches to inclusive development. The tower beneath his feet housed 200 families from diverse backgrounds. Its ground floor businesses thrived with community support, and its public spaces hosted events that brought together neighbors who might never have met in a more segregated environment. The morning light reflected off glass facades throughout downtown Seattle, each building representing countless decisions about design, construction, and community impact. Damon had learned to see the city differently since that October confrontation, recognizing both the potential for architecture to bridge divides and the responsibility that came with professional influence. His phone buzzed with a message from Dr. Angela Foster, the newly appointed dean of the University of Washington's College of Built Environments. Dr. Foster had revolutionized architectural education by integrating social justice themes throughout the curriculum, and she was inviting Damon to deliver the keynote address at the college's upcoming graduation ceremony. The invitation represented more than professional recognition. It symbolized how far the industry had traveled from the assumptions and biases that had once seemed immutable. Young architects graduating today would enter a profession increasingly committed to equity, inclusion, and community-centered design. They would face different challenges than Damon's generation, but they would also have better tools and stronger institutional support for creating positive change. The transformation had neither been quick nor simple. Real change required sustained effort from individuals and institutions willing to examine uncomfortable truths about their practices and assumptions. The incident at Skyline Commons had provided a catalyst, but lasting progress demanded ongoing commitment from everyone involved in creating the built environment. Educational institutions had played a crucial role in this transformation. Architecture schools across the Pacific Northwest had redesigned their curricula to address bias, cultural competency, and community engagement. Students now learned about inclusive design principles alongside technical skills, preparing them to navigate diverse professional environments with greater awareness and sensitivity.
Construction management programs had undergone similar revisions, incorporating workplace equity training and cultural awareness into their core requirements. Trade schools emphasized respect and professionalism in their apprenticeship programs, teaching young workers that technical competence must be accompanied by inclusive attitudes and behaviors. The University of Washington's program had become a national model for this integrated approach. Dr. Foster's leadership had attracted faculty members committed to both academic excellence and social justice, creating an environment where future architects learn to see their work as inseparable from broader questions of equity and community impact. Damon's own role in this educational transformation had expanded significantly. He now served as an adjunct professor, teaching a seminar called Architecture and Social Justice that explored how design decisions affected different communities. His students came from diverse backgrounds, bringing perspectives that enriched classroom discussions and challenged conventional approaches to architectural practice. The seminar's final projects consistently impressed external reviewers with their sophistication and social awareness. Students designed homeless shelters that preserved dignity while providing safety, community centers that served multiple generations and cultures, and housing developments that fostered economic integration rather than perpetuating segregation. One particularly memorable project involved redesigning a suburban shopping mall as a mixed-use community hub that could serve as a model for addressing retail obsolescence while creating affordable housing and community spaces. The students' presentation had drawn interest from real developers who were exploring similar concepts, demonstrating how academic work could influence actual practice. The business case for inclusive design had become increasingly compelling as companies discovered the financial benefits of equitable practices. Firms that prioritized diversity and inclusion reported higher employee satisfaction, lower turnover rates, and stronger client relationships.
Insurance companies offered premium discounts for comprehensive bias training, while lenders favored projects that demonstrated community engagement and social responsibility. Hartwell and Associates had experienced this transformation firsthand. The firm's reputation for inclusive design had attracted clients seeking architects who understood community needs and cultural sensitivity. Project budgets increasingly included line items for community engagement, accessibility enhancements, and affordable housing components that had once been considered optional extras. Sarah Hartwell's decision to promote Damon to associate partner had proven prescient as his expertise in inclusive design became increasingly valuable in a competitive marketplace. Clients specifically requested his involvement in projects where community acceptance and social impact were critical success factors. The firm had also expanded its staff to reflect the diversity of communities it served. Young architects from various cultural backgrounds brought fresh perspectives to design challenges, while helping the firm build authentic relationships with different neighborhoods and constituencies. The workplace culture had evolved to support these diverse voices and ensure that all team members felt valued and respected. Meridian Construction had become an industry leader in workplace equity and inclusive practices. David Meridian's initial response to the security checkpoint incident had evolved into comprehensive reforms that affected every aspect of company operations. The firm now required bias training for all employees, maintained detailed protocols for professional recognition, and actively recruited from diverse talent pools. The company's commitment to inclusion had enhanced its reputation and competitive position. Clients increasingly valued contractors who could demonstrate cultural competency and community engagement. Public sector projects particularly favored firms with strong equity records, creating business incentives that reinforced moral imperatives. Tom Bradley had been promoted to Regional Operations Manager, partly in recognition of his leadership in implementing workplace culture changes. His experience managing the aftermath of the Skyline Commons incident had prepared him to address similar challenges proactively, preventing problems rather than merely responding to them after damage was done. The informal worker discussions that Marcus Washington had initiated had evolved into formal employee resource groups that provided ongoing feedback about workplace climate and inclusion efforts. These groups had become valuable sources of insight for management decisions and policy development, creating pathways for worker voices to influence company practices. Frank Morrison's journey had been more complex and personal. The bias training and counseling he had undergone had fundamentally changed his understanding of professional judgment and cultural awareness. He had eventually left Pacific Security to become a trainer himself, helping other security professionals recognize and address unconscious biases that could affect their work. His presentations at industry conferences drew large audiences of security personnel who appreciated his honest discussion of how good intentions could still produce discriminatory outcomes. Frank's willingness to acknowledge his mistakes and share his learning process had made him an effective advocate for change within the security industry. The letter he had written to Damon had evolved into an ongoing correspondence about bias, reconciliation, and professional growth. Their relationship demonstrated that genuine accountability and sincere efforts at change could create possibilities for understanding and healing even after serious harm had occurred.
The broader construction industry had embraced these changes with varying degrees of enthusiasm and commitment. Progressive firms had seized opportunities to differentiate themselves through inclusive practices, while more traditional companies had made minimal changes required for compliance with new standards and client expectations. Professional organizations had played crucial roles in driving industry-wide transformation. The American Institute of Architects had established diversity and inclusion requirements for continuing education, ensuring that practicing architects regularly updated their cultural competency alongside their technical knowledge. The Associated General Contractors had developed comprehensive guidance documents for creating inclusive workplace cultures, providing practical tools that companies could adapt to their specific contexts and challenges. These resources had been particularly valuable for smaller firms that lacked dedicated human resources staff to develop policies independently. Labor unions had also embraced inclusion training, recognizing that diverse and respectful workplaces benefited all workers while strengthening solidarity across racial and cultural lines. Union leadership had worked closely with management to address bias and discrimination, creating collaborative approaches that improved conditions for everyone. The legal framework surrounding workplace discrimination had evolved to address subtle forms of bias that traditional enforcement mechanisms had difficulty capturing. Employment attorneys had developed new strategies for documenting and addressing microaggressions, unconscious bias, and systemic discrimination that operated below the threshold of overt prejudice. These legal developments had encouraged companies to invest in prevention rather than merely responding to complaints after problems occurred. Proactive bias training and inclusive policy development had become standard risk management practices, protecting companies from liability while creating better workplace environments. The technology sector had contributed to these changes by developing new tools for project coordination and communication that reduced opportunities for bias and misunderstanding. Digital platforms now included detailed professional profiles, role descriptions, and collaboration features that help team members recognize and respect each other's expertise regardless of appearance or background. Artificial intelligence systems had been developed to analyze workplace communications for patterns that might indicate bias or discrimination, providing early warning systems that allowed organizations to address problems before they escalated into formal complaints or legal action. The incident's impact had extended far beyond Seattle's construction industry, inspiring similar reforms in other cities and regions where professionals had read about the confrontation and its aftermath. Conference presentations, academic papers, and media coverage had spread awareness of both the problems and potential solutions throughout the national construction community. International visitors had studied the Seattle model for addressing construction industry bias, adapting its approaches to different cultural contexts and regulatory environments. The basic principles of respect, recognition, and accountability had proven universally applicable, even as specific implementation strategies varied based on local conditions. The next generation of construction professionals was entering an industry fundamentally different from the one that Damon had encountered as a young architect. While challenges remained, the explicit commitment to inclusion and equity had created frameworks for addressing bias and discrimination that previous generations had lacked. Young professionals of all backgrounds reported greater confidence in their ability to succeed based on merit rather than connections or stereotypes. Mentorship programs had been expanded and formalized, creating pathways for career advancement that were more transparent and accessible than traditional networking approaches. The economic benefits of this transformation had become increasingly apparent as companies discovered that diverse teams produced more innovative solutions and served clients more effectively. The business case for inclusion had reinforced moral arguments, creating sustainable motivation for continued progress. As Damon prepared to leave the Skyline Commons rooftop, he reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. The humiliation and anger he had felt at the security checkpoint had been transformed into advocacy and leadership that had influenced an entire industry. The pain was real and lasting, but it had also created opportunities for positive change that benefited countless other professionals. His phone displayed a new message from a young African-American architect in Portland who had heard about Damon's work and was seeking mentorship advice. Similar requests arrived regularly from emerging professionals across the country who saw him as a role model and advocate for inclusive practice. The responsibility was both humbling and motivating.
Damon understood that his visibility came with obligations to continue pushing for progress while supporting others who faced similar challenges. The work was far from finished, but the foundation had been laid for continued transformation. As the sun climbed higher over Seattle's skyline, and Damon made his way to the building's elevator, ready to begin another day of designing spaces that would serve diverse communities for generations to come, the city below hummed with construction activity, each project representing opportunities to apply the lessons learned from one October morning when assumptions were challenged and change became possible.
The legacy of that confrontation lived not just in policy changes and training programs, but in the daily choices that professionals throughout the industry made to treat each other with respect and dignity. It was embodied in the buildings rising across the skyline, structures designed with inclusion and community impact as central considerations rather than afterthoughts. The story that began with exclusion and discrimination had evolved into a narrative of transformation and hope. It demonstrated that meaningful change was possible when individuals and institutions had the courage to confront uncomfortable truths and commit to doing better. The work continued, one project, one relationship, one decision at a time, building a more inclusive future for everyone who would shape the environments where people lived, worked, and gathered. The construction industry that had once questioned Damon's credentials based on his appearance had been transformed into a profession increasingly committed to recognizing and celebrating the contributions of all its members. The change had not been easy or complete, but it had been real and lasting, creating possibilities that would continue expanding for generations to come.